I also welcome all the distinguished guests and the student participants from various institutions who have come all the way to attend this program. It's an honor to welcome to the dais a well-known luminary in the likes of who are a fast disappearing class. Former chairman, Haryana Electricity Board, veteran bureaucrat, civil rights activist, reformer, prolific speaker, and an equally prolific writer and a champion of sustainable living. His crusade against corruption and views on responsive governance and urbanization has been well acclaimed, widely acclaimed. Always loud and clear on taking a strong stand against injustice, he has constantly stood for democracy and sound utility management. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to introduce and welcome the distinguished senior bureaucrat, Shri M.G. Devasahayam, a man of diverse experience and high integrity.
May I now request the campus director, Shri Rajiva Prakash, to welcome Sir by giving a bouquet.
Sir, it's an honor to have you on the panel today.
Shri M.G. Devasahayam has done post-graduation in economics from Loyola College, Madras. He taught for an year before commissioned to the Indian Army soon after the Indo-China War. From the Army, Devasahayam moved on to the Indian Administrative Service, Haryana cadre, and has headed districts, departments and public sector undertaking as well as held senior secretariat positions. He solely raised a new districts in Haryana and evolved an integrated development model which became the predecessor for the IRDP in the 70s. In the corporate sector, he has served an advisor to leading transportation and power companies. In the voluntary sector, Shri M.G. Devasahayam founded Citizens Alliance for Sustainable Living and is the managing trustee. Sustain, a network NGO he founded, advocated responsive governance, resource efficiency, and sustainable development. As founder convener of the Chennai-based Forum for Electoral Integrity, a civil society coalition, he launched a frontal assault on electoral corruption and money power in politics. Devasahayam is a prolific writer and has written extensively and done several case studies. He has been a regular columnist for the Tribune, Chandigarh, Indian Express, New Delhi, New India Express, Chennai, and Cliffy's, New Delhi. Sri Devasahayam was closely associated with Loknayak Jayaprakash Narayanan, JP, during and after emergency and with Mother Teresa in setting up the home for orphans, abandoned infants, and a sanctuary for lepers at the city of Chandigarh outskirts. He considered the privilege of knowing and closely associated with JP and Mother Teresa as the greatest achievement of his life. Sir, I welcome you to this panel discussion.
A dynamic lady executive in the world of port and shipping, distinctly dominated by men, known for her extensive marketing and administrative skills. She metaphorically shines as a lodester. Let me welcome to the dais none other than the vibrant Vinitha Venkatesh, Director, Krishnapatnam Port Container Terminal. I request Dr. Swaminathan, Campus Director in charge, to kindly welcome. Ma'am, we are very delighted to have you on stage as a panelist.
Ms. Vinita Venkatesh obtained her bachelor's degree in economics and statistics from the University of Bombay and went on to study at India's premier business school, the Indian Institute of Management, IIM Ahmedabad, with a specialization in marketing management. She is the member of India in the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers, London, and has over 25 years of experience in the shipping industry. Her career comprises tenure with the Shipping Corporation of India, P&O Ports, now part of DP World, and Samsara Group. Her wide range of specialization include liner shipping, agency of ports, CFS, and logistics. She has served as the Chennai coordinator of the India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh Conference, IBPBC, and also teaches as a guest faculty at the PSG Institute of Management, Coimbatore, and the National Academy of Customs, Excise, and Narcotics, Chennai. As director on the board of Krishnapatnam Port Container Terminal, Ms. Vinita steers the business development of the port. Madam Vinita Venkatesh, I'm sure your presence here is to boost our women cadets and the women managers. Thank you, ma'am.
An energetic and versatile personality, he has served at various prestigious institutions and built up vast knowledge and experience in the field of port and infrastructure. With excellent communicative and analytical skills, he has been on several advisory boards and is currently into what he does best, advocating maritime law in a leading law firm. I warmly welcome to the dais Shri Balasubramaniam, maritime lawyer with the law firm of J. Sagar Associates, one of the top 3 leading law firms in India. We welcome you, sir.
Mr. J. Balasubramaniam, an MBA, a Coast and Management Accounts, and a lawyer with training in port management in UK and Singapore, has dealt with ports in various capacities in the last 27 years. He trained port managers in port finance, was engaged in credit rating port infrastructure bonds at Investment Information and Credit Rating Agency of India, ICRA. Later, as Senior Director, Project Finance at Infrastructure Development Finance Company Limited, IDFC, he advised the Government of India in designing model concession agreement in major ports and in corporatizing the major ports of Ennur. He also has financed rupees 5,000 crore of senior debt to port projects. He has visited more than 100 international port terminals. Shri Balasubramanian has chaired the working group on ports of Planning Commission on Ports. He was invited by the government of UK to meet the Duke of York and by World Bank and ADB to share his experience on PPP in ports at International Forum. He has been part of National Port Group of the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. He was engaged by the World Bank to advise on legal reforms required in Indian maritime sector. He is a media columnist on port and a guest faculty for PPP Law and Finance at Indian Institute of Management, International Law Schools, IAS Academy, and Reserve Bank of India. Sir, we are happy to have you here.
And finally, to all who have known him, any reference to this person's name immediately brings an adjective to one's mind: erudite. A lot more adjectives could very easily be listed: enthusiastic, learned, meticulous. This is one personality who immediately fit the role of a moderator to an eminent panel of speakers. We needed to look no further for a person with as sound a knowledge and rich experience to espouse on the theme of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce and welcome the Emeritus Professor, Dr. Jose Paul, to the dais. I request Dr. Shekhar to kindly do the honors.
Dr. Jose Paul served as former chairman, Marmagua Port Trust, and was former acting chairman, JNPT and Mumbai. He holds the position of an independent director of SR Ports and Mumbai and is an emeritus professor at Amidst University. Post-graduating in political science and a doctoral degree on port management from University of Wales, Cardiff, Dr. Jose Paul has traveled wide, visited many countries, and spoken at several international conferences. As a prolific writer on ports, he has published many articles in Indian and international journals and magazines. He was the only Indian speaker invited to speak on the 21st World Port Conference in May 1999 in Kuala Lumpur and subsequent year in Canada by the International Association of Ports and Harbour. Dr. Jose Paul was also part of expert groups on globalization of port logistics by UNCTAD. Sir, I welcome you for the panel discussion.
With that brief introduction of our eminent panel, we move on to the discussion on the theme corporatization of major ports in India. I would like to say that this topic came up as an unanimous choice when we brainstormed for a contemporary topic that would be academically debatable and set the stage for a healthy discussion and knowledge sharing. May I request the moderator, Dr. Jose Paul, to kindly initiate the debate. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Respected Vice Chancellor, Mr. Shetty, Mr. Devasahayam, Mr. Balasubramanian, Ms. Vinitha Venkatesh, respected members of the faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen. I consider it an honor and privilege to be invited by the Indian Maritime University to function as a moderator on a subject of great relevance to our country. Before I go into the subject, let me take this opportunity to congratulate Mr. Shetty and Lekha for the selection of speakers. We are a nation of 125 crores of people, and 50% are women. And I find Vinitha Venkatesh an example for gender equality in our country. You might have read in the Economic Times these days, I have been myself an independent director on SR Ports. Under the new company law, Indian Companies Act 2013, there is a mandatory provision to have a woman director. And the SEBI had clearly indicated that before the 31st of March 2015, all boards must have a woman independent director. As a independent director on SR Ports board, I get a frantic call from Bombay. Sir, a resolution has to be passed urgently. I said, why? No, we want a woman director and before the 31st she should join. And excepting about 30 or 40 companies, most of them have complied with that mandatory requirement. What does it show? It shows only when legislative provision is provided as a deterrent, then only our companies will think of giving a legitimate chance for our women folk. I am sorry about that. It has taken such a long time. Well, I must also congratulate the Indian Maritime University for selecting a very relevant, important subject for discussion and debate today. Corporatization of Indian major ports. Why is it important? It is important because all the ports in India put together handle about 1,030 million tons of cargo. Major ports, latest figure, 581 million. All non-major ports put together about 450 million. In 2000, the share of cargo handled by major ports was almost 90%. Non-major ports, 10%. And in 2015, the share of major ports has come down to 55%. All non-major ports put together has increased to 45%. The importance of non-major ports is coming up. The importance of major ports going down. That should not happen. If they have to remain major, then they will have to play a major role. And what is the one that is holding up for this major role to be played by major ports? Organizational restructuring. That is exactly what is meant by corporatization of ports. I should say, luckily, on the 9th of February, I published an article in Hindu Business Line. India needs a vibrant national policy on ports. And I dealt with the subject, corporatization of ports. Maybe because of that, I think the Indian Maritime University thought I would be the right person to come for this seminar as a moderator. And luckily again for me, on the 28th February, when the finance minister presented the budget, specifically, he mentioned about the corporatization of ports. I am a product of major port trust as chairman of 2 major ports. And I have seen the working of major port trusts. Major seaports in the world, Germany, Hamburg, in Belgium, Antwerp, in Netherlands, they have all changed from the of municipality to corporatized. I will delve into this subject in greater detail during the course of the discussion. There is no structured program, but I thought we would invite the students, request them to briefly introduce the subject and the area where they like to talk. Getting their domain knowledge in the field. After, we want to see the floor is kept open for an open debate. The difference here that you would find is we want the section of the audience to take part in an energetic, enthusiastic discussion, giving their views. giving them an opportunity in a very democratic style. I hope that would be more interesting. I would now request Mr. Dev Sayam to be the first speaker. Mr. Vinitha Venkatesh to be the second speaker, and Mr. Balasubramaniam the third. They will briefly introduce to you the area where they would like to talk. There will be questions among four of us. We will also invite from the audience questions. All of us will discuss, and at the end we will come to know corporatization of major ports, which the government wants to introduce, would be for the betterment of India's economy or not. In 2 words, I would request Mr. Devasahaya to come forward and make the first presentation.
At a panel discussion, I think I'll sit here and talk. I've been asked to open the sort of panel discussion with my observations. See, I am an outsider as far as ports are concerned. The subject is corporatization of major ports. I have never managed a port, but I have managed similar entities like ports. Now, there are 3 different kinds of government-owned entities, and I have been manager or head of all the 3 different variants, except of course the port. One is the roadways, Haryana Roadways. I was the chief of Haryana Roadways for 2 terms, and that is a 100% government department. Even now, nearly 30 years after I have been head of that, it continues to be a government department. At that time it was headed by the State Transport Controller. I was a State Transport Controller. Now the designation has been changed to Director General Transport, and he reports to the Secretary Transport Department of Government of Haryana. Out and out, 100% government department. Okay. The second one I headed was the Electricity Board, which is similar to the Port Trust, created out of the Electricity Act of 1948 as an autonomous body with a board entirely nominated by the government. Haryana State Electricity Board, prior to reforms where it has been restructured and made into corporate entities. The third one I managed was a company, Haryana State Industrial Development Corporation, which was registered under the Companies Act and functioned as a corporate entity. So, and then in the private sector, though I have not been part of I have been a very close observant of the process of attempted corporatization and privatization of the power sector, and how we have got into a total mess, because the objectives of corporatization, which was attempted in the mid-90s, was wrong. The objective was wrong. The objective was not for the Electricity Board to perform their primary task of delivering power, quality power at a reasonable price so that it could be accessible to everyone in the country. That was not the objective. Objective was to corporatize, unbundle and privatize. That was objective. In the consultant report itself it says 95-96. And I have been part of the process. I have been the devil's advocate and head-on collision with various people at that point of time, 1995 to 2001, 2002. Eventually World Bank withdrew from the power sector reforms, because, and even now we are in a deep mess as far as power sector is concerned, because the objective of corporatization was not the correct, and then also started on the wrong end. Instead of starting with the distribution end, they started with the generation end. I will go into that later. Similarly, So I will not be able to make, won't be making a value judgment on corporatization, but I will be sharing with you the experience that we have gone through in corporatizing and also privatizing. Perhaps the most crucial infrastructure in the country, that's the power sector. Then road transport also, though I have headed a government department undertaking, which is even now doing very well compared to many corporatized roadways all over the country. Haryana roadways results are much better than most of these because a basic foundation has been formed. So even now, a purely government undertaking is performing certain very important critical tasks as far as road transport is concerned. Similarly, most important point I would be making here during the course of the discussion is, even in spite of all this, except after privatization, whether it is government department, whether it is electricity board, which is a board, which is autonomous board, whether it is like the Interstate Development Corporation, government control is absolute. Government control is absolute. All these so-called corporate sectors and all is only namesake. One of the most fundamental requirement of corporatization is government should not have control. Corporatization must yield place to competitiveness. The sole purpose of corporatization, if not the sole, the most primary purpose of corporatization is competition. Encourage competition, which in turn will bring about efficiency, lowering of cost. You provide service to the sector that you are serving. In the case of power sector, it is from the poorest of the poor to the richest of the rich. Port may not be doing that. Road transport also, it may not be richest of the rich, but poor, lower middle class, middle class. The objective is to optimize the functioning, make the entity efficient, competition, and deliver services. But unfortunately, even after all this exercise, government holds complete control. For instance, in Tamil Nadu, I'll deliver it in detail later, though they have corporates, TANGEDCO and TRANSCO, and they have a regulatory agency, but when you have a competition, you immediately have a regulatory agency, organization. We have a regulatory commission. But government control still continues, inefficiency still continue, corruption still continues, and the objective of corporatization has not been achieved. Broadly, I will close with this opening remarks. Later, of course, I will elaborate on whatever I have been telling based on what the moderator allows me, the time and other opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In fact, you have raised one important point. Even after the corporatization, the government exercises absolute control. We will have a discussion on that. Now to Vinitha Venkatesh, please make an introduction briefly as Mr. Devasahayam has done. Introduce the subject, area of your specialization, based on your domain knowledge, and then we will note down the points, we will take it up at the time of discussion.
So thank you. I'm going to approach this topic from the perspective of my experience. I have worked with a completely government organization, Shipping Corporation of India. I have also worked with a private organization, P&O ports, within a government organization. That is, I'm not comfortable with, I'm comfortable holding it. I have also worked within a private organization, which is within a government organization, as in P&O ports is a private company but working within the framework of Chennai Port Trust. And now I am with Krishnapatnam Port, which is a 100% private organization. So from this perspective, I am approaching the corporatization of ports. I'd like to say that we fully and completely support the government move towards the corporatization of India's major ports. The concept of corporatization or the objective is not to make money, because all of our port trusts are sitting on very, very huge cash reserves. They are very profitable organizations. So the concept is not to make sure that they make money. The concept is to improve the efficiency and the utilization of that port, and finally to improve India's imports and exports by providing a good service. For the longest time, even today I think, the Chennai Port Trust, when it calls the liner agents and calls the CHAs and other stakeholders for a meeting, this meeting is termed Port Users Meeting. The word customer never comes into the framework of these meetings. And I think that, like we were discussing earlier, it is not a question of only bringing the ports under the Companies Act. It is a question of a cultural change in the mindset of the management and the employees of the ports. They have to stop thinking that they are a statutory authority and that other people can come and use their services. No, they have to think that they are a service organization and the people who use their services are their customers. So we are talking really about a level difference here. The Port Trust as a government organization has to perceive themselves as lower than their customers. It should not happen that a liner company or a CHA managing director or a CEO has to wait for half an hour outside the office of a traffic manager of a major port trust. That is wrong. The traffic manager should be going to the head of a Nissan or a Hyundai company and waiting outside that office for a meeting with the CEO. And I promise you that CEO will not make him wait for half an hour, but will see him exactly at the time that he gave the appointment. So just to summarize, I'd like to share our experience, my experience as a private port operator, and from that perspective, let's look at how major ports can benefit from corporatization.
Very well indeed, Vinita. In fact, you raised two important points. The objective of corporatization should be to improve quality and performance. And you mentioned that the managing director of a shipping company has to go and wait before the traffic manager or the port trust chairman. I remember having a very interesting conversation when I was chairman of Marmugava Port Trust, went and met the chairman of Shipping Corporation of India. He called all the directors and said, see, a port trust chairman is coming to meet me. All along we have to go and wait to meet the chairman. And he quietly asked me, what prompted you that you should take a different approach? I said, if all of you do not come and if your ships do not call at the port, my port will have no business. That is the reason. Your point of change, culture change is very, very important. Now we would request, detailed discussion would take place later. I would now request Balasubramaniam, a person who has helped in the corporatization of Ennur, the only corporatized port in India. But please remember one important aspect. Ennur, immediately after the declaration of that port as a major port, was constituted under the Companies Act. So Ennur did not carry any old baggage. Ennur was a grassroots port, straight away brought under the Companies Act. Therefore, they had an easy situation going ahead. But here, all these 12 major ports, 11 major ports are already working under the Major Ports Act, and therefore the going would be difficult. Now, Mr. Balasubramanian, please.
Sorry, I'll try to make it as brief as I can, but I was not fully ready for this sort of discussion, but let me run through the slides for the sake of giving a brief overview what perhaps I might discuss in detail depending on the question and answers. Yeah, can you just go to that fast? So, okay, I don't think I need to get into my credentials. So basically, I'm a finance person and a legal person who has worked in the port industry for 27 years in different capacities. I was in the finance industry. I was credit rating bonds. I was also trained in port management, and I also advised government, and now I'm a lawyer. So the views which I'm going to now present, plus we also advise the government of India on how to corporatize a new port of Ennore. And the model PPP documents, what you see in the ports, we are done by us. Okay. I think the galaxy of people here, first of all, I must take this opportunity to acknowledge Dr. Jospal here. Otherwise, I will not feel very comfortable continuing the rest of the talk. Before the world, most of us, when we were all fishing along the seashore, he was actually managing the seaport. And this is not just to say, kudos to him, but he's probably the doctor of port reforms. He was the first port chairman, or perhaps I should say, the first port manager to go overseas to do a doctorate on port reforms way back in 90s at his own cost. Traveled to several countries and produced a seminal work on port reforms. So that's still, and there's another person who was his guide, Richard Goss. These two are the Bible of port reforms in the Indian context. So I think I should acknowledge that before we get that. Of course, it's not the forum to talk about him, but he was also the first port manager to get a Akiyama Award for the International Association of Ports and Harbors for doing institutional reforms on the ship-to-shore labor. So very fitting that I must thank IMU and congratulate IMU for choosing him to chair it, because history is where it belongs. So I'll be very ungrateful if I don't acknowledge that on his sir. Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be sharing the same dais with him, with just saying that. Having said that, let's quickly get back to why are we talking about corporatization. Let's go back into history of port trust. What do you call it a port trust? Because most of your MBA students, you would not have heard about trust. A trust is basically when someone manages interest for others. In good old days, port was a monopoly industry, and it was quite potential for abuse. So the government formed, like the world, other countries, trusts to manage in trust a port business for the common benefit of all. That's why if you look at Indian Port Trust Act, it always says administration report, it never says profit and loss account. It doesn't use the word profit, it says surplus, because money making was just incidental, the main objective was to serve trade. Now over a period of time, a trust which was supposed to be only of users, unfortunately because of bad management went to the government hands, now it has become a government run trust port. That's a different story altogether, but that's the origin of the trust. So it's supposed to be a business for trust because it's a monopoly. Now, this is a historical baggage. Why? Because with the advent of private ports today, with ports available every 100 kilometers along India's coastline, monopoly is no longer there. It's a complete free market. Krishnapatnam port, Ennore, Vishakhapatnam, Gangavaram, you see the ports in so close proximity, users have a choice. So monopoly is no longer relevant. Today, that's the first reason, and why today, as Dr. Jospal said, last 30 years, the steadily minor ports, which was the earlier term for non-major ports, became actually the major ports. Today, they are having 45% of the traffic from just 10% in 90s. So what has happened to the trust ports is that the trust ports are governed by an act. Since some of the MBA students, I'm just giving the background, it is governed by an act called Major Port Trust Act. It defines how you manage a trust property. So this management, which requires government approval at different stages, which takes away the incentive, managerial incentives, is anachronistic in present times when private ports have got complete freedom to compete. So the first objective of corporatization is to bring a level playing field between public sector port trusts, which have become anachronistic with time, to put them on par with the private sector so that they have the flexibility like a Companies Act. That's our first objective. The second objective, if I can say that, is that the port trust today is run by the Board of Trustees. If you look into the governance structure of a port trust, the Board of Trustees have got representatives from users also. That's because of historical reason, because it is run for the users, right? So you have the users who's going to pay for your services sitting in the board meeting and listening to the pricing discussion, listening to your commercial calls. It's a very difficult situation. You can't manage your customer in your board. No private sector port would like to have the users on the board. It's different that you consult with them, but you don't put them in the management. So the second problem is the governance structure is completely antithesis to how a commercial business should be run. And that's a reason the objective of corporatization is to transform the Chennai Port Trust Chennai Port Limited to a board of directors who are expected, assumed to be independent and professional, to run the business and don't run to the government for anything. And classic case of Ennur, as Dr. Dospal said. In fact, when this mandate was given to us in IDFC, when I was in IDFC, let's corporatize. But unfortunately, I agree with him completely, it started with a very wrong notion that you start with Ennur. That's how the political decisions were taken, unfortunately. Because we didn't want to corporatize a port where it will create a labor problem. So we ended up nursing a patient who was not a patient, right? So we created a corporate port of Ennur, but there's only one port, corporate landlord port in the whole world, which is in Geelong in Australia. So Ennur port may not be the right example, but even then, look at the results of Ennur port. The results have been staggering for the last 10 years. Why? They have been able to take quick decisions. Some of them have been right, some of them wrong, but that's the essence of corporate decision. You don't always make right decisions, that's their business. So you create an enabling framework, and Ennur port, even as a landlord port, has been able to demonstrate the results. Yes. The objective of corporatization is that the main objective are twofolds. One, you get a business autonomy. Today, if Calcutta port has a Hooghly river and you don't take ships beyond 6 meters, you get killed because it's a location-driven port. Whereas if you look at a port of Singapore also operates in Singapore. Why? The port expertise is global. The port of Singapore operates ports world over, the expertise, and that's one of the objectives of corporation is to make Chennai Port Limited, for example, or Calcutta Port Limited, a global port which can do port business not just per a location, because the locational concept is gone and the hinterland concept is gone. So they no longer trust ports, they can take the best commercial decisions. So that takes away the hinterland risks. The second objective of that is that commensurate accountability. What does corporation do? Today, the budget is prepared by the porters and approved by the government. You have no accountability for results. The moment you run as a corporate and you run to the banks for funding, bankers will ask you a lot of inconvenient questions. They do due diligence. Why should I give money for this project? It's not making profit. So you sort of become accountable for the external market, and that's the main purpose of corporation. Corporation gives you autonomy, but there's also commensurate accountability for results. And next. Now, very often, the whole purpose of this seminar is to bring you different facets. There's a looming fear among public sector. Would corporation make the ports very profitable and neglect the users completely? The answer is yes and no. It depends on how you're going to manage the transition. What does it mean? If you create a corporate port, it's going to be commercial. Now, earlier days, porters would charge low tariff. But then, the user cost is very high because of the low productivity. Today, look at private ports. They charge a huge tariff, but the end user cost is minimum. The point is that Indian ports may perhaps never be able to compete Singapore port even if you charge zero tariff. The fate does not lie in tariff, but the total user cost. If tariff, Singapore port will charge more, but will turn on the ship faster, so the end user cost is minimum. The objective of corporatization is not to prevent profits, to make sure the quality of profits is good. That is, you are allowed to make profits, but make sure the end user cost is not high and it is competitive. So it is different from the trust days where port tariff is low, but end user is optimally because you have berth waiting time of let's say 10 days. And having said that, I think we'll go to the next one. And the last one, if you think corporation is going to happen if there is private sector ports, do you think the port tariff are going to go to the roof? Not really. Again, the process has to be managed. A problem of public monopoly and private monopoly are the same. People make money. The whole objective is, as Mr. Devasakam rightly said and Dr. Jospal said, and Vinita was also referring to, is a competition. Now you have to, the government's role changes from administering ports to facilitating a climate where ports are on a level playing field to compete. Why does Navasheva port is the most important port? You have to make sure other ports are able to compete on a level playing field by making the switching easier, by connecting roads, rail network, inland waterways, dredging, deepen the dredging, do the governmental responsibility, don't charge it on the corporate port, do the common infrastructure and make sure ports are able to compete and so that the customers have a choice. And second, it's high time port trust moves from TAMP regulation to competition regulation. That means it's going to be fierce competition. There is like a regulatory failure, there can be market failure where competition can also be dangerous. There can be unhealthy competition, somebody can charge zero tariff. That's how the rule like Competition Commission of India, which is going to come in. So ports have to be subject to competition law because to make sure that the market discipline is maintained. Next one. I think we lawyers have a fertile time going ahead. If you are interdisciplinary, we'll be able to create a framework. So be careful about the lawyers because we'll take advantage of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Balasubramaniam. Thank you very much indeed. You have brought out some very important points. First one, by corporatizing a port, you will not only aim at improving better qualitative performance. In addition to that, to capture global business as the Singapore port is doing. And that is an important point. Chennai or Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust could certainly take and march forward into that area by doing consultancy work for other third world countries. That is possible, particularly in Africa. The other important point which I like to ask that corporatization essentially makes a deviation and helps a trust port from an administrative port to a commercially driven port. That is an important point because they are thrown open into a competitive arena with other non-major ports working efficiently. Well, these 2 points are well noted. I think now what we will do is that I will ask 1 or 2 questions to the speakers, just to initiate the discussion. Thereafter, I would invite you to ask questions to all of us, to the moderator as well as to the speakers, and create a dynamic and lively environment for discussion and debate. I am sure we will be able to get answers to most of the things that we have in mind.